You have to deal with that. And the other thing is, when we go to questions, we have a handheld mic. And in order for us to capture your questions and comments adequately, you need to wait for the mic, if you don't mind. Because otherwise, the tape will show you your mouth moving and no sound, which would be really unfortunate, because the whole point of us being here tonight is to capture your thoughts as well as the candidates. So at that, I will leave it to JW.
Cell phones off, please.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to the second of the Lincoln County News 2018 General Election Candidates Forums. I want to take a moment to thank the town of Waldoboro for the use of this space. Thank you also to LCTV for recording the event to make it available to a wider audience. Thank you to the candidates, and thank you to the audience for your willingness to attend and participate. In a moment, I'm going to ask the candidates to introduce themselves. After introductions, I'm going to ask the audience for a question. The questions from both the audience and myself will continue until it's time for closing statements. The only thing I ask of audience questions is that they be civil and somewhat relevant to state government. Candidates will have 2 minutes each for introductions, responses to each question, and closing statements. I'll hold up this yellow card at 30 seconds and a pink card when time runs out. Without further ado, please introduce yourselves. We'll start with Stephen Ball.
Well, hi. Thank you very much, Lincoln County News, for sponsoring this, and LCTV for broadcasting this and taping it, and to everyone for coming out, particularly on an evening like tonight with all the rain. My name is Steve Ball. I live in Windsor and am running to be the state representative for Somerville, which is in Lincoln County, Windsor, Vassalboro, and part of Augusta. I spent most of my life in Maine, and my youth was in southern Maine. I married a 9-generation Maine girl. We've been married for 43 years. We have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. I left Maine in 1978. I joined the Army. I went off, was commissioned out of the University of Maine, and spent the next nearly 28 years in the Army, traveling around the world, always knowing I was coming home to Maine. Came back to Windsor in 2006 and moved on to a family farm that has been in my wife's family for many, many generations. And then I taught at Erskine Academy. And after Erskine Academy, I taught at Thomas College. My goal for running, quite honestly, what caused me to get out and run is we can do better. There are far too many Mainers who are not doing well. Partisanship has taken over the State House. Taken over, people have decided, whatever camp they're in, have decided how they're going to position themselves on a particular issue almost before it's published. And the camps don't talk to one another. And I would say an indication of that is the fact that the State House left with 100 bills not acted on, and so I decided to run.
Thank you. Representative Bradstreet.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for all for being here tonight. My name is Dick Bradstreet. I live in Vassalboro. I've lived in Vassalboro a little over 20 years. I grew up in Albion on a potato farm, one of 8 kids, where we all learned to work at an early age, all learned to get along with each other. I graduated from Lawrence High School in Fairfield in 1969, and after that I went to Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, Graduated from there in 1973 with a degree in sociology, which may surprise some of you that I'd have a degree in sociology, yet am a Republican. So after that, I went to work for my wife's grandfather in Winslow. He had a manufacturing housing retail dealership. Worked there for 12 years. Then my wife and I started our own business in Winslow, doing pretty much the same thing. We employed our 3 children at the business for a good part of the time. We have 3 children. Joanne and I have been married for 46 years, have 3 children, 7 grandchildren. We like to see them stay home in Maine. That's one of the goals that I have, to create an environment where young people will feel like they can make a good living for themselves here in the state of Maine. A few years ago, my wife and I decided to sell our business, or to close it, I should say. We sold our property in Winslow to the American Legion, which is now their state headquarters. I'm very happy that they did that. I'm proud of the fact that what the state headquarters was once my place. I've stopped and visit there occasionally and talked to the people there, have a good feel for what their thoughts are. Also, I've in my communities, I used to serve on the Comprehensive Plan Committee in Albion. I served on the SAD 49 School Committee when I lived in Albion. I moved to Fairfield a few years later, was elected there also to serve on the school board. I've served on the Winslow Community Federal Credit Union Board, several years as chairman. I no longer serve on that. I'm pretty busy in Augusta. I think I've done a pretty good job representing the people of District 80. I certainly would like to have another 2 years. We do need some work to be done. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Chloe Maxman.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chloe Maxman. I'm running for District 88, which includes half of Noblesboro, Jefferson, Whitefield, and Chelsea. I am so excited to be here tonight. Thank you for everybody for participating. I grew up on my family's farm in Noblesboro, and for as long as I can remember, I have cared about our home and our community here more than anything, and I've devoted my life to fighting for Maine. I went to Lincoln Academy for high school, and then I went to Harvard for college. I came back literally the day after I graduated. Since then, I have been working during the day for Maine, and at night I've worked at restaurants and bars and wedding venues because that's what it takes for a young person to build a life here in Maine. For over half of my life, I have worked with different communities to call on our political system to fight for us, to fight for our access to health care, for education, for our seniors. And in all of this time, I've only seen these crises worsen. I've been knocking on doors here in District 88 since February. I have had thousands of conversations with voters. And the #1 thing that I hear is not an issue. It's that politics is a mess, and it's not fighting for us anymore. Because if we had a politics for the people, then why can't we afford health care? And if we had a politics for the people, then why can't we afford to age in our homes? This campaign is and always has been about doing things differently. We won our primary in June with 80% of the vote. More people voted for us than have voted in total in any previous Democratic primary in this district. We've been endorsed by over a dozen local, national, and state organizations. We've had over 80 letters to the editor. I have worked in the State House. I have met with representatives. I've worked on campaigns. My professional work currently is and always has been around politics. And I know that the system is failing us, and we need to do things differently. How do we get there? We need to elect different kinds of people. We need to elect young people who are bringing in a different energy and different perspective into these political spaces. And we need to elect more women. The fact that I'm the only woman up here tonight is a testament to that fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Lemelin.
Hi, I'm Michael Lemlin. Thank you all for being here. I was born in Biddeford. I went to Brunswick High School. I went to college to be an aerospace engineer. Wanted to be a pilot astronaut. Things fell apart with the economy in the early 80s, so I became a pilot instead of a pilot astronaut. I stopped flying 22 years ago because I had a son, Christian, who was born with multiple disabilities, and he's deaf. At that time, we didn't have cell phones. I was paged all the time. I had to fly home all the time for him So I decided to give up my career and fight for him and care for him. My wife and I both gave up our careers for a while, and then we started some small businesses, and I continued to care for my son and manage the businesses that we own. We live in Chelsea. I have 3 children. Deb Sanderson approached me a year ago and said, we could really use you to run. And I said, let me think about it. And many people came to me and said, you fought for your son for 20 years. It's been quite a battle. You win every single time. Why don't you do that for the people of Chelsea, Jefferson, Whitefield, and Noblesboro? So my wife and I sat down, thought about it, and we figured we could do it. So I took on the challenge, and now I'm running for representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey Evangelos?
Thank you, JW, and thank the Lincoln County News and the town of Waldoboro for hosting us tonight, and thank everybody for coming. I'm Jeffrey Evangelos. I'm an independent running for the House seat, House District 91, which encompasses Waldoboro, Friendship, West Union, and Washington. I live in Friendship. I went to the University of Maine, graduated from graduate school there, and immediately upon my graduation, I went to work in public service. Became a town manager when I was 23 years old. I was town manager of Warren, Maine. And subsequent to that, I went to work for SAD 40 under the leadership of David Gall, my good friend, for a period of 15 or 16 years. We had a great school board, very collaborative. Got a lot of good work done. We built 5 schools, provided athletic facilities for our youngsters who didn't have them. We were able to have home games at the elementary and junior high level, which we never had before. And we had a really good run. It was a great period of time in my life. One of the things I did, I consider it one of my greatest accomplishments, was I fought for the workers of the school district who were underpaid at the time. I'm talking about the bus drivers, the custodians, the school lunch workers, the teacher aides, and the secretarial staff. People were making, believe it or not, less than minimum wage, which was legal at the time. They were also working without health insurance, and the school board charged me with instituting a program to help those people, which I did. And the school board unanimously implemented our recommendations. I'm married to Harold York from Waldoboro. We've been together a long time, and also a self-sufficient farmer. Subsequent to my school service, 30 seconds. Subsequent to my school service, I ran a private business in Waldoboro for 20 years. And then I had to close that down due to some foreign policy issues overseas. I wasn't able to travel any longer to the countries I went to. So I ran for the legislature and was elected to 2 terms, served in the Judiciary Committee, State and Local Government, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and the Ethics Committee, and looking forward to returning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Abden Simmons.
Yep, my name is Abden Simmons. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm a lifelong resident of Waldoboro. I actually bought a house a little over 25 years ago right in town. I grew up in Waldoboro. I dig clams for a living. I'm the Shellfish Committee Chair for Waldoboro, the biggest clam producer in the state. We have over 172 license holders. That's a lot of families to take care of and manage. I've served on the planning board for 6 years in Waldoboro. I've been just re-elected to the select board, so I'm on my 4th year on the select board. I've been married for over 25 years. My son's just turned 26 2 days ago, and he was in the Marines, which we were very proud of. Being up in Augusta is a real eye-opener of what really happens up there, and it's correct. It's bipartisan. It's unbelievable, and neither side wants to give. It makes it very frustrating for a person like me that's willing to give and take a little bit and not be able to do that. When someone says they want to make a change, it's not just that simple. You just go up there and say, this is what's going to be, this is what I'm going to do, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't work that way. You got to work as a team, and I have seen it up there that not everybody works as a team. And it frustrates me. People ask me why I'm doing it again, because I'm not done with commercial fishing. They talk about all these programs that these places want to pay for. Well, you've got to have people working in those to be able to pay for those projects they want to do, expanding health care and stuff like that. Without people working, those programs can't get funded. And Waldeboro and Friendship are two huge fishing communities. And without the regulations that keep being handed down to us, that are crippling us, we're gonna be out of a job before it's over with, and these projects aren't gonna get funded. And we have over 650 license holders in my district, District 91, and it makes it very frustrating for them guys to have to go to work and jump through hoops just to be able to go to work. And I'm up there to represent that. Thanks.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the audience for our first question of the evening. Who has questions? Mr. Johnson? Oh, yes, I'll bear with me just a second.
Is this working?
Yes.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions, and I'm not sure how many we'll have a chance to ask tonight, but I think I'd like to start with one that is important to most all the people in this district, and that's the issue of school funding. 55% education funding has been voted 3 times now, passed by the people of Maine. And this most recent time in November 2016, they voted a sustainable way to finally fund the entire 55%. That was voted into law until it was undone by the legislature. Would you support restoring a fully sustainable 55% funding of education, knowing what it means to property tax impact in towns of Lincoln County?
Thank you. And we'll give that question first to Representative Bradstreet.
Thank you. Yes, the law does require 55% for essential programs and services from the state. There is one problem with that, is that we're always chasing it, because if we fund it one year, the whole total goes up, and the next year we fall short. There are some people who there is a belief out there that in a lot of ways we are funding that. We factor in teachers' retirements, salaries, and their life insurance and health insurance. I know that's not an adequate answer, but yes, I do support that. It is the law. I do believe that we should obey the law. However, when those things happen, like for instance any referendum question, there are a lot of details that need to be worked out. Some things are not always workable. What we need to do is to stop the partisanship and get together and find out a better formula. I think one of the weaknesses we have in the state is the education funding formula, which tends to favor the schools in the southern part of the state, those that are better financially better off, where the rural Maine is getting the short end of the deal. What we need to do is to adjust that formula, and I know there have been some moves to do it. We seem to find opposition, mostly from the southern part of the state, because they'll be adversely affected if that happens. The short answer is yes, I do believe it's the law. We should do it. I think there has to be a realization, though, that it's not always as simple as it seems. I know when Abden mentioned a few minutes ago that things aren't as simple as they seem, he's correct. But it is a goal that we should pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. Chloe Maxman?
Yes, I do think that the state should be funding 55% of public school budgets. That, to me, this plays into the larger theme of our government not respecting the will of the voters, and this is not the only referendum in which we've had these problems. It does tie in so much with our property taxes, and when the state isn't funding its share of school budgets, then it falls on us to fund our schools, and that is one of the biggest things that is impacting people in our district. We have some very high mill rates in District 88. And over the past, from 2011 to 2016, our property taxes here went up by $30 million every year. And so if our state isn't paying its fair share, then we're the ones who have the burden. I think another piece of that is that rural communities need to be treated equally, because if the burden's on the property taxes and then there's less people in rural communities and we make less, then our schools get less money.
Thank you. Michael
Lemelin.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yes, I'm in favor of the 55%. However, it would take about 2 hours to explain to the people why that's not being done, and there's a lot more involved than meets the eye, just like with all the referendums. The easy answer is, listen, if the people voted for the referendum, who are the legislature or the governor to try to overturn those referendums that the people voted in? I mean, that's ridiculous. However, there's more than meets the eye. The problem is the referendums aren't always worded properly. So the people are voting for something that could actually hurt them. As far as the 55%, I'm all for it. Absolutely. However, we have to break it down, and like Dick said, we have to break it down better for the people that need it. Right now, it's not broken down right, and it needs to be adjusted. So there's a lot more involved here, and it's a matter of the legislature breaking it down and doing the work and working together, which they're not doing at this time.
Jeff Evangelos.
Thank you, JW. Folks, in 2004, the original referendum, we voted, ironically, by 55% to require the state to fund education at 55%. It was a 2004 referendum submitted to the voters. And there's been a variety of administrations and legislatures that have refused to comply with the will of the people. I think the biggest problem that we're facing now is that Maine has adopted somewhat of a regressive tax structure. We've cut income taxes for the wealthiest people in the state, and causing revenue not to flow to our schools. And that forces property taxes up for people on fixed income and the elderly. So that is highly regressive taxation, and so there are answers. We also have a good amount of money to address the problem if we can just get the will to do it. The state ended the year with a $155 million surplus. And we have the same problem with the revenue sharing to our municipalities. We're not meeting that obligation either. We used to cut a check each year to our communities, 5% of our sales tax and income tax revenues, and that went to the bottom line of lowering your property taxes, folks. The same with the 55%. When Mr. Gall and I ran the schools here at SAD 40, SAD 40 was a recipient school, and our towns did receive 55%, and the property tax burden wasn't so bad. But we're no longer honoring that. The tax code has been tweaked several times in a more regressive fashion, and so excise taxes and sales taxes and property taxes have gone up, and you know, tax cuts for the wealthy just hasn't been a good strategy. So I think those are the answers. Obey the will of the people and redo the tax structure in a more progressive fashion so that we can help out the people on fixed income and the elderly who are struggling with their property taxes.
Representative Simmons.
This has been a battle in Waldoboro for SAD 40 for quite a while, and I kind of put it back onto the schools because in our area we are struggling. Our taxes are incredible, but we don't have the manufacturing jobs, we don't have the office buildings or anything like that compared to Southern Maine. Southern Maine should not be getting 55%. They should be getting less. This area where it's struggling should be getting more. That structure should be changed because they have all the, I don't know how to explain it, the businesses down there do not compare to what's up here. And we don't have the structure enough to sustain what we do. I think that the formula has to change dramatically. Something's got to change. It's not just the 55%. And I'm sure there's smarter people that are in the school districts that could figure this out. But school districts don't want to fight with each other. They want to just get paid what they feel as though they're owed and move on. And it's not fair to the people up here that Southern Maine is taking the lion's share of the $162 million that we reallocated to them in the budget for last year. One of the richest districts got $5 million of it. One of the richest districts. And it makes it very frustrating when we only got 1.8 million. And we're the ones that should have got to 5 million, and they should have got to 1.8 million. Because they have such a big budget down there that's running rampant, it cripples us. And it's very frustrating.
Stephen Bowe?
Thanks. Thanks, Judge. Yes, I would say clearly I support the 55% completely. And yes, it is a complex issue. But we need to make education a priority, and we need to realize that schools are struggling. And as far as I'm concerned, the tax structure needs to be looked at. The tax structure is not supporting fair distribution across the state. We also have school districts that are in richer areas that are doing obviously much better than many of the schools in our area. So, so we need to look at the formula. We need to look at the tax structure, as Jeff said, and we need to support 55%.
Thank you. Before we go to the next question, I want to go over a couple things that I forgot to go over at the beginning. In the back, there are homemade donuts. There's sugar donuts and pumpkin donuts. The ones without the sugar are pumpkin. The cider, water, and outside these double doors and to the right down the hallway, there are restrooms. So I'll ask the next question, and then we'll go back to the audience. So please, I want to have a lot of audience questions tonight. Have them ready. I'll be asking for one after this. But next question to the candidates. This will go to Chloe Maxman first. Do you support question 1 to create the universal home care program and pay for it with a 3.8% tax on family and individual income above $128,400. Why or why not? And what changes, if any, would you like to see to the law?
I support the intent behind question 1, but I do not support question 1 itself. When the signatures were collected for question 1, the tax was on individuals only taxing money over $128,000. That affected about 1.6% of Maine's population. After the signatures were collected, the language was changed to say individuals and families, and what that's done is leave it very open to interpretation and could possibly target joint incomes, which means that 5 times more Mainers would be impacted by this tax and really hitting middle-class Mainers. So there is a serious elder care crisis here in Maine, and I think one of the things I like about question 1 is that it will increase the wages for in-home caretakers, but I think the way that the referendum is worded and doing this through a referendum process is not the right way to do it.
Michael Lemelin?
No, I don't favor it. The reason I don't favor most referendums is because of the wording, and I discussed that earlier. Maine people just don't understand these referendums, and the way they're worded, they don't have the truth. They just don't understand this. The truth is not all in there, and a lot of these referendums hurt more Mainers than they help. We vote for them, and then a few years down the road, we're like, what happened? Well, it's simple what happened. You weren't told the truth. I want these referendums to be explained thoroughly to the public. That way it's broken down step by step. The Mainers know exactly how it's going to affect Mainers, because that's not known just from the question alone. So people have to have the facts, and the facts aren't in these referendums, especially this one here.
Jeff Evangelos?
Thank you. Well, of course, in principle, the goal of the referendum is to keep the elderly in their homes, and that's a noble goal. The wording of the referendum has some issues. One, as Chloe mentioned, was the income didn't get clearly defined between an individual and a joint income in a family, and that could become a real problem with two middle-income wage earners. There's another deficiency in the referendum, and that is what I call the governance provision. The board that they're setting up to oversee the program and the funds does not have any state official involvement, like we would have the state treasurer normally oversee state money. But this is a board of private people, and I'm not comfortable with private individuals having governance over public funds. I do want to explain a little bit about where did the $128,400 come from. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but the man or woman who makes $20,000 a year pays 100% of their income into the Social Security tax. The person who makes $10 million a year only pays Social Security on the first $128,400. So I think the intent of the referendum writers was noble. I think they were targeting the wealthy who aren't paying their fair share into Social Security, so they're addressing an elder care issue to try to help people stay in their homes. However, the referendum has some issues. If it does pass, it's going to have to be remedied, similar to the way I felt about the minimum wage proposal. I never believed that waiters and waitresses should have been included in it, and you know there are remedies if things pass. So I have reservations, especially around the governance. I'm having a lot of trouble with the governance on this.
Representative Simmons?
The same way. I mean, the way these referendums are written, people are very disillusioned on what really these referendums mean. And when it comes to the legislature, if it does pass, we have to fix it. And it may not come out the same way they thought it was supposed to happen. They have issues. They always have language issues. I even actually talked to someone that was a extreme Democrat that agreed that these should be remedied and vented before they even go out to the people. But that's not what happens. So then we have problems that arise in these referendums that we as the legislature have to fix, and it's not that easy just to fix something. Then we get thrown under the bus saying we're changing the referendums or we're not doing the will of the people. And this is a prime example of it. It could actually hurt, like Chloe said, it could actually hurt people more than help them. And I'd love to see people be able to stay in their houses and live the rest of their life there. But if this is an issue that it's going to affect them, then we can't support it.
Stephen Lowe?
Hi. I think, like everyone here, am not happy with the wording. I would not support it as written. However, I would say we do have a health crisis, and the elderly in particular. We are an old state that is getting older. We've got an increasing, rapidly filling up capacity for the ability for hospitals and clinics to be able to respond to those. Quite frankly, if we don't have in-home care, we're going to be in trouble. So we need to address this issue, but I think this referendum this whole referendum process is merely another example of people being frustrated to the point of doing something, to be able to respond to something that the legislature has found unable to be able to adequately fix. So that's where a legislature that is willing to work across all sides and really talk to people and shed their party affiliation and make sure that they're working and representing the people that put them there. So this issue is important. Having elderly be able to stay at home is an important issue, but this particular referendum does not answer the question.
Representative Bradstreet?
Thank you. Yes, I do agree that people should be encouraged to age in place as best they can, and sometimes they need help. However, I'm strongly opposed to this referendum question. I think we've heard most of the reasons already. It is incurred an invasion of privacy with your records. Most people don't know that. There is a unionization slant to it, which is written into the last page of the bill, of the referendum question. It does not even take into account people's ability to pay. It doesn't take into account the fact that they can come to Maine and the next day be on the system. It does discourage higher income people from living in Maine. They have choices as to where they can live, and if they choose to live somewhere else, they take all their income with them, and we don't see it again. That's happened time and time again. This also points out the weakness, once again, of the referendum process, because it does not include all the items that need to be addressed. A public hearing would be very valuable in a situation like this. We proposed a public hearing on this report, went to the voters. It was turned down on a straight party line vote, and we lost by 1 vote. So that's where we're at. It's a $310 million price tag to it. It's significant. It deserves a public hearing, and I think most people would agree with that. Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'm going to ask for another question from the audience. I'm going to go to Mr. Grant next.
Thank you. One of the things that's always bothered me is our young people have to leave this state to get good jobs. And Dan and I have 5 grandkids between us, and not one live in the state of Maine. And we have high taxes, we have a lot of regulations, we have high power costs, we have a reputation of being anti-business. And we graduate some I went to Maine Maritime, we graduate some pretty smart kids from our colleges, Maine, UMO also. We got some top-rate colleges. We got some good schools, we got highly motivated people. I worked at Maine Yankee when that was shut down during King's administration. And of the 1,000 people that worked there, most of them had to leave the state for good jobs. And I'd like to ask all the people here what they would do to get us some good companies, good jobs coming to this state. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll go to Michael Lemlin first.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I keep butchering your name.
You're doing great. There were 2 issues that you brought up. One is building jobs, good jobs for Mainers here. And the second thing you mentioned was everything's going out of state. And I experienced this a few years ago. It's a big issue. It's one that I will definitely address. And that is that there were 2 young men that were entrepreneurs. And I'm big on entrepreneurial moves. There were 2 gentlemen that graduated from high schools close to here, and they had great ideas. One went to Denver, Colorado, one went to California. They both owned $5 million businesses. We let them walk away. They left for exactly the reasons you're talking about. We can't let this happen. We have to keep these young adults here in Maine and build their businesses here. But Maine didn't want to help these 2 individuals. Colorado did, and so did California. That's all wrong. The second thing we have to work on is small businesses in Maine. Large businesses, very large businesses, at first glance, wow, boy, this is going to help Maine. It actually isn't. And if I had more time, I'd explain to you why bringing IBM here would actually crush Maine, but yet building our small businesses will build Maine. And that's what we need to do, is focus on small businesses, relaxing the tax burden. I could go on for an hour. I'm a small business owner, and we're being choked to death. We have to stop it. We have to stop it now, and we can build Maine back up.
Jeff Evangelos?
Thanks for the question. It's a good question. You know, it has to be a multifaceted approach. I want to support workforce development and training so that the students who are graduating from our technical schools and our community colleges are job ready, so that will attract businesses in here. When I grew up, corporations and businesses were willing to train young people when they got their first job. It seems to be less of an inclination for them to want to do that now. They want everybody ready to go. I also think we need tax reform in the state. Our small businesses and our big businesses are burdened by unfair property taxes, and you know, I'm sure that this is going to be a tough one to fix in Augusta because our communities and state have become so dependent on it, but we have a really tough excise tax system here. If you run trucks or anything like that, you know, or boats, it's tough. And, you know, a lot of that revenue kicks back to the towns. And, you know, you can register a car in Florida, from what I understand, for $45. And, you know, every time you come to the town office, it's $300-400, you know. So it's hard in Maine. I also think we need a lot of improvement in our infrastructure. We've got to do something about the transportation system. I was listening to the radio on Columbus Day, and there was a 26-mile backup from just south of Portland all the way to Massachusetts, almost, you know. If you're moving products, you know, from Maine or into Maine, that's a killer right there. It affects productivity, and it detracts from companies wanting to come here because they want to be efficient and be able to get their products. So, you know, we need probably another lane in the highway. I know they didn't like it before, but we've got to be able to move products more efficiently. So it's going to be a combination of strategies and somewhat on the tax incentive side, but I don't want to go too far on that if the burden falls on the other property tax owners who aren't businesses. Thank you for the question.
Representative Simmons.
This has been a big thing for me. Trade schools. You don't have to go to college to make a really good living. I never went to college. I graduated from Medont Valley in 1989. I've had a successful business going on 23 years. We need, as a matter of fact, we just built a new building. We're trying to get it finished, but it was a struggle to have electricians, plumbers, heat guys, carpenters. It's ridiculous how hard it is to fight to get people to work for you. And if we had, like the trade school at the Region 8 that we just spent $25 million on, instead of just running during the school year, run year-round, so those kids that are learning a trade could advance themselves. When they come out of there, they could potentially have a $15 to $20 an hour job versus a minimum wage job. And it's very frustrating to me that all these kids are going out of state to colleges and stuff when they could stay here. Maybe they don't want to go to college. Maybe they want to learn a trade in Maine. A friend of my son's works at a boat shop. They're 3 years out. They can't find enough help. Why couldn't these trade schools work year-round to take and teach these kids how to work with fiberglass, work with composites? This is what we really need in Maine. If you want Maine kids to stay here, you've got to give them jobs that are here, not out of state. And it's very frustrating.
Thank you. Steve Ball.
Hi, I would say that, thank you very much for the question. Why young people are leaving the state of Maine, I would argue is not necessarily because of an overburdened tax structure. I would say that it is probably because wages in Maine are horribly low. Working class in Maine simply are struggling to the point of not being able to afford health care, not being able to afford rents, not being able to afford living. And they can find those kinds of jobs. Leaving Maine with the same skill set that they have, they can find a quality of life elsewhere. So we need to realize that our small businesses in the state of Maine, in order to keep people here, we need to pay a wage that encourages young men and women to stay here. When we say living wage and we throw that term around, the fact of the matter is we aren't paying a living wage. We've got a bunch of these workaround sorts of schemes that businesses have that really allow them to pay low wage, seasonal workers, part-time people, and you just can't live on that. So first thing is wages. Second thing we need to do is we need to focus on education. Education in the state of Maine is the way to keep workers here. I support an internship program, an enhanced internship program at the high school level, where you've got young men and women that can go off to work, learn skills that businesses want, in addition to learning how to be on time. What sort of dress do you wear when you go to work? What sorts of responsibilities? How do you act within a business structure? So I think there's much we can do.
Representative Bradstreet.
Yes, thank you. This kind of hits close to home with me. I mentioned I have a daughter. She went to California when she graduated from college to get her master's degree. She lived up in Sonoma County, met a man there, got married, had a family, but she always wanted to come back to Maine. I think we're talking about bringing businesses in, and I think we should. We ought to first tap into our native-grown businesses and encourage them. We do have a higher tax burden in a lot of cases, and it is discouraging to people to start businesses. We have cut the taxes, and yet our revenues have increased. So there is the more money you can take home and put in your pocket, the better off we are. The more apt you are to start a business, to hire people, to be able to afford to pay them good wages. I really have a question about the continual increase in the minimum wage, because that's like pushing a rope. You have to have the businesses successful before you can afford to pay higher wages. We do need targeted job training. I was at a place the other day in Winslow. They build electrical components and they ship them all over the world. High-paying jobs they have there. They had 14 interns this last summer. I was there with Scott Moody, and he couldn't believe it, because usually you talk about there are 3 or 4 interns at best. This was a successful model. And we talked about have the trade schools been conducive to your success? And he said, to a point they have, but there is more that we could do. We need targeted job training. We need to look at broadband expansion. I did talk to a young man the other day who spends 6 weeks working in Rhode Island and then comes back here for a couple of weeks. He says, you just don't have what I want here. The young people want broadband. They live on their smartphones, and we don't have everything that we need here. We need to incentivize bringing that to the rural parts of Maine. Thank you.
Chloe Maxman.
Well, as the young person trying hard as heck to build my life here and stay here, I'm very excited about your question. I have four answers to what you brought up, most of which has been touched on, but some not. The first is affordable education, whether it's technical training, community college, four-year education. Students should be able to afford to go to college, and we should have incentives for those students to stay in Maine afterwards and participate in our economy. The second is bringing in vibrant industries to Maine that are sustainable. I've always looked at the renewable energy industry as a very positive addition to our economy, bringing skilled, good-paying jobs to our state, and we need the state incentives to bring those companies and those businesses here. The third, like we just heard, is broadband. Maine ranks 49th out of 50th in the U.S. for broadband quality, which is not okay. I mean, almost 50% of Americans are working remotely right now. I can tell you not a single one of my friends can live or work without access to the internet. And I think the biggest way to get young people to stay in Maine is to elect young people to office. The average age of the Maine legislature is 54. Policy is crafted with the perspective of those who make it. If we don't have young people in office, then our perspectives will not be included. We think about and see our futures in a different way, and that's what makes it beautiful. Our legislature should reflect the diversity of our communities, and we're not quite there yet, but we can get there very soon.
All right, we're ready for another audience question, and I'm gonna go first. I already saw his hand up. I'm gonna go to Dewey Mateer.
Thank you. K-12 education receives a lot of attention during the election season. Witness the first question tonight. However, early childhood education also plays a major role in supporting our current workforce and developing our future workforce. Research has also shown that it provides the best return on education investment. What would you do as by early childhood education? I mean, home visiting, child care, Head Start, and public pre-K. What would you do as a legislator to improve access to quality early childhood education?
Thank you, and that's going to go first to Jeff Evangelos.
Thank you for the question. Those are all great points, and I would certainly vote to support all of them. I know that our own school system has instituted pre-K. We have a strong Head Start program right here in Waldoboro. Anything we do to reach the youngsters at a very early age, before they get to kindergarten and first grade, make strong and productive students. Just as an aside, I also think we need to strengthen our presence in the schools regarding the opioid crisis and talk to our students about the dangers of the addiction. Not pre-K, but again, your question is laying the groundworks for success in the future for the youngsters. So I would support funding initiatives to support every one of the items that you mentioned.
Representative Simmons?
Oh, absolutely. We gotta mold our children early and get them motivated and in the right direction that we would like to see them go. Well, like I said, Madomic, SAD 40 has a great program. The only issue I see with it is a lot of kids get left out. A lot of that stuff has got to do with what the parents make. And it's very frustrating that we're targeting the not so fortunate when the fortunate could be in there as well, and we could take and work them in so they can learn, they all can learn together. And molding them at a young age is the prime example of what we really need in the future, and hopefully they'll follow and we can break a cycle that we have of this stuff. And like the opioid problem we have, this is one thing we do have to start early with them and make sure that they realize that these drugs are bad, because if not, when they get to a certain age, that they're not going to know, or they've heard about it and stuff like that. But I do support the kindergarten, the preschool forum and stuff, and I think Waldoboro is still got to do some work on it, but I think it needs to be looked at seriously.
Mr. Ball?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I would say that, and you asked what would we do, and I would tell you what we need to do is to begin to provide access to funding for early childhood education. I think that we either lose or we win a child at the earliest stage. So we all need, and some of our poorest communities, and Central Maine has many, need tremendous help in funding, putting together, structuring, manning these programs. So I am very supportive of there being funding available for families to be able to send their children to early childhood education. Now that's going to have to be funded, and I believe that we need to make it a priority, and it needs to be a priority that we can all support, because it begins to impact the direction a child makes from that point forward. So I would be very supportive of entertaining avenues for funding to be able to support early childhood education. I think it's critical.
Representative Bradstreet?
Thank you. I think we all value education very highly here. Early childhood education is vital to a person's success. You know, I have seen some studies that show that the advantage of people who have received education in the early years, that advantage they have over children who have not, dissipates over time. So I think what we need to do is not only talk about funding it, but what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. What can we do to make sure that that education that they get translates into something that they can use in the later years. It's a lot like when I was in college, there was a study about how prep school students do, and they do better the first year, but after the second and third year, they do about the same as everybody else. That's something we have to be on our guard against. So funding it, targeted funding. We need to do that strategically rather than just say that we need to put a lot of money into it with everything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dewey, for this question. I know this is something that you've devoted a lot of your life and time to, and so thank you for all of the efforts that you're doing for our state. And my opponent, Mr. Lemelin, and I were grateful to be able to visit one of the Head Start programs in Chelsea. You know, only 1 in 3 children who are eligible for Head Start are actually in Head Start programs because of the lack of funding. There is $3.1 million in funding for Head Start that has not made it to the programs just because of government bureaucracy. So I think one of the things that we need to do is really streamline and prioritize that this funding gets to the places that it needs to go.
Mr. Lemlin?
I agree. When I visited the Head Start program, I'm very familiar with Head Start. And my problem is there's not enough tools and resources for the schools still. There's definitely not the funding. It's something that I have been fighting for many, many years. I value the Head Start program and early development. But I think what we need to do is have these schools make sure that they're all properly structured. Most of the Head Start programs, especially in Chelsea, they're very well run, but not all of them are. And we're not blaming, I don't blame the schools or the school district. I blame the resources. Some of these schools can't get the right resources, they can't get the money, and this has to end now. Every single child has the right to the same education, and it's not always being done. These children are hungry and thirsty for it, but they're not getting it. I know because I had to fight tremendously for my son, and why? I shouldn't have to. So yes, early development is critical. I believe in the pre-K kindergarten program, and I definitely believe in Head Start. I just believe that we need to go back to the basics, get the proper funding, and make sure that these children are getting the same education that everyone else is getting.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for another audience question now. Barbara Burt.
I've heard a number of you say that you have grandchildren. Chloe is obviously not in that category. But I want to talk about something that some of us may not be around for. Chloe will be, your grandchildren will be, or your friends' grandchildren. And that's the consequences of the global warming that's going on. The UN just released a horrendous report telling us that in 2040 there were going to be changes that I don't think we can even imagine right now. We're already starting to see the results of some of this in the hurricanes that are much stronger, the rainstorms, the tornadoes, etc. So I want to know what each of you hopes either someone of your generation, Chloe Maxman, or a grandchild of the others of you will say when they look back and see what you did in the legislature to deal with this issue that's facing us.
Thank you. Representative Simmons?
Being in the commercial fishing industry, I see it a lot. Lobsters are going deeper, they're staying out further. Clams, we're having an awful problem having clams settle up in the rivers with recruitment. It is a huge issue, but the Shellfish Committee for Waldoboro that I'm a part of, we've also been doing ocean acidification, and that's a huge issue. People, say about global warming, but what about ocean acidification? When product spawns, clams, oysters, mussels, lobsters, crabs, everything. If that ocean is so acidic that they cannot form a shell, we're not going to have them. And everyone says it's global warming. Well, you get another underlying aspect is ocean acidification. Fortunately, well, I shouldn't say fortunately, but luckily up in the Madomic River, we've been fortunate enough that it's not acidic. But as soon as you get outside the mouth of the river from Bremen to Friendship, it's unbelievably acidic. And We fight a huge amount of pollution in this area. A lot of towns don't do what Waldoboro does. We've gained a lot of mud flats back. That's one of the things that is a priority of mine, is making sure these rivers are healthy. And I think we're not going to roll back time. I'm sorry, it's been a million years in the making. We'll probably never see it turn, but I'm sure we can slow it down. But I'm not really exactly sure what we can do to actually slow it down other than get rid of fossil fuels. And I don't see that happening either. I mean, we can reduce it, but I don't believe we're gonna completely eliminate it. We gotta go to renewable energies, just like we get hydropower out of Canada, runs right through us. You know, that's gonna help. That would help reduce our fossil fuels, but we're not allowed to touch that. And it's very frustrating that we are not be able to touch a resource like that.
Mr. Ball?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. This is an issue that is dear to my heart. I would say that the days of discounting climate change somehow as a hoax or bad science are over. The UN report, I wouldn't call it a horrendous report. I'd call it a very good report with horrendous results. It well documented, well researched, reviewed by scientists, and yet we still have people in this country who refuse to accept that this is a problem. And we need to embrace the fact that we are not, our economy particularly in the state of Maine is dependent, probably more so than many, on the effects of climate change. The Gulf of Maine, NOAA has been looking at water temperature in seas and oceans for the last 30 years. The Gulf of Maine has exceeded the global average by 3 times. 3 times the global average. In the last 15 years, the Gulf of Maine has exceeded the global average by 7 times. Our waters are changing. Pollution, acidification, warming. Lobstering off of Kittery and York essentially is going away. Lobsters are moving north. We need to realize that this is a problem. We can't accept the fact that doing away with fossil fuels is not attainable. We need to embrace the fact that renewable and sustainable energy is within our reach. Europe is doing it. I was just in Europe. You see more solar panels and wind turbines and offshore wind operating in Europe than you do in the United States. It's amazing. We have not accepted that we need to make a change. So I am an advocate for sustainable energy completely.
Representative Bradstreet?
Thank you. I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact that we do need alternative energy sources. I was at a meeting a couple of days ago where they were presenting, you've heard the controversy about the power line coming down through Maine from Hydro-Canada. That alone would help to reduce the use of fossil fuels a fair amount. In Canada, there's the project called Muskrat Falls. That may not help us immediately, but sometime down the road, hopefully it will, because it would be able to provide us more clean energy. We do have to be a little bit careful here because this is a global problem. It's not just relegated to the United States. My son-in-law, who's an engineer, was in China a couple years ago. And while he was there, he noticed all the smokestacks belching coal out of them. They're building coal-fired plants left and right. What we got to be careful of is that we make it so expensive for businesses here to survive. People, these global companies will take the business somewhere else where the pollution will be much worse than what we have here. So we have to have a measured response. We do need to do it. We have to think about it very carefully. But it's something we do have to address. Thank you.
Chloe.
So I have devoted the majority of my life to working on the climate issue because I think that it is the greatest threat to our economy here in Maine, our culture, our way of life. Our entire state is built on our natural resources, our farms, our rivers, our oceans, our lakes, and all of that is threatened by climate change. I'm truly scared, genuinely scared, and have been for most of my life, not just because of what's going to happen with our weather and our seasons, but the thing that scares me the most is that we need political action to address climate change, and we have seen none, literally none. There are almost no incentives now in Maine for people to go solar anymore. I work for a nonprofit that helps people install solar panels and connect them to installers. And you know, we say you have to do it by 2019 because after that you have no more incentive. They've just been stripped away. I have friends who work in the solar industry and they're moving out of state because they have no future here. So that's a big reason why I'm running, because I think that we need people in office who are going to be responsible and responsive to these major crises, not just the immediate ways that we see its impact, ocean acidification, the droughts in the summer, the snowmobile industry not being able to survive in the winter, we're not able to go skiing. You know, when I was little, we used to drive the truck out onto the lake, and I can't remember the last time I did that. So there are these very immediate impacts, but we're also facing these very long-term impacts. And so if we're not thinking about this in both of those scenarios, then it's going to be, yeah, the consequences, I think, are really hard for us to imagine. Another quick point on that is that I think Maine is a frontline community, which means we've done the least to cause the crisis, but we're the most impacted by it. And a consequence of climate change is that sometimes we have super cold snaps in the winter, and that impacts people who can't afford heating and don't have weatherized homes.
I'm just gonna say Mike. That's right.
That's fine. This is a concern of everybody's. However, the biggest problem, of course, is it's easy to talk about global warming and its effects. And we can get as mad as we want. However, and we can talk about the different ways to progress. However, the biggest problem with alternative fuels is cost factor. Yes, there's incentives, but most of these incentives aren't enough for the average person in Maine to sit there and say, wow, let me do that, because the cost is way high. So what I ask the activists out there that are pushing for this really, really hard, which I'm glad they're there, however, what I ask them to do is spend their energy on coming up with an alternative fuel source that everybody can afford. If it's equal to the other sources or just slightly higher, I'm all for it. But if I have to pay $10,000 extra a year, I can't afford it. Neither can the people in my district. So therefore, what we need to do, in my opinion, is educate. So what I would like to do is start educating, even at a small age, on how to control the things that you do so that we can minimize this climate issue until somebody, maybe even Chloe, can come up with that alternative fuel that all of us can afford, because we're all for it. But it's a cost factor.
Jeff.
Thank you, JW. Well, Barbara, I think you asked us what we were going to do, and not necessarily what the conditions are on the ground that we're experiencing. And, I mean, honestly, we're going to need a new deal like FDR did for alternative energies, solar development, wind power where it's appropriate, and any other alternative energy strategies that can displace the fossil fuels that are driving the global energy and global warming crisis. Let's get one thing straight here, folks. The biggest subsidies that our country is paying right now, our government, is to the fossil fuel industry. We are subsidizing the oil companies to the 10th degree. We sell them blocks of drilling rights in the ocean and on our land-based resources for peanuts. And if we had the same approach to our solar energy development that we did to the big oil companies, we'd be well on our way. You know, in my lifetime, the lobster industry from Long Island to Cape Cod has died due to acidification and warming. The Gulf of Maine has been found to be the fastest warming body of water in the world right now in percentage terms. It's frightening. Right now, our lobster industry is in the sweet spot because the lobsters are passing through our gigantic territory, and our lobstermen are doing well, but very worried about what will happen. We also have predation of these species that have moved into our area that are affecting Abda's industry, you know, these Asian and green crabs and the like. So climate change is having a tremendous effect on our marine resource economy, on our environment, and on the sustainability of the planet. We're getting some pretty strong hurricanes, folks, and the storm surges are record levels. So, you know, the sea level doesn't have to go up very much for a 100-year storm to really cause a lot of devastation when a astronomically high tide hits in combination with strong winds. We've got to it's got to be a New Deal approach, state and federal government.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question, and this will go to Mr. Ball first. During every election season, we all receive attack mailers from political parties, both political parties, and special interest groups like political action committees. Will you commit to a positive campaign, and will you speak out against negative tactics if someone else uses them on your behalf? Mr. Ball?
Thank you. Yes, I am adamantly opposed to any sort of negative campaigning. And I certainly wouldn't do it and wouldn't allow it within my campaign. And if it happens outside of my campaign, then I would, in fact, try to stop it. Yes, it's a part of politics today. It's a sad part of where we are. But I would commit to not participating or standing for negative campaign.
Representative Bradstreet?
Yeah, I think we're probably all going to be unanimous on this. It's a bit disgusting what goes out at times. I know I kind of wake up each morning wondering what the next attack is going to be on me. Not that I've had it yet. And I'm so thankful that my opponent here is not that type of person. I think he's a true gentleman. I think I'm a true gentleman too. I would never do that to people. I know some of this dark money that comes from out of state that's unaccountable. That's where it comes from. It's a sad situation. But I would say publicly here now, don't do it. Thank you.
Chloe?
Our campaign has been positive from the very beginning. We are creating a vision about what we're for, not what we're against. In the primary and in the general, I have never said a single negative comment about my opponent at a door or in any kind of public forum, and I think that's what the people of Maine deserve.
Michael?
I agree. I don't think there's any need for it. I think a person should be elected on their merit, not on whether or not they can belittle their opponent. I just got a little piece of well, it was actually quite nasty in the mail about somebody, and my wife looked at it and she said, "Oh my gosh." She goes, "Why is this person doing this?" And it sticks out to me. Yes, I'm dead against it. You'll never see me mail out anything negative against any of my opponents. I don't believe there's any need for it.
Jeff?
Thanks, JW. Well, as you know, JW, I've been the victim of some of the worst attack mailers in the history of our state. I've had mailers sent out 4 days before the election questioning my patriotism with my phone number on it, accusing me of not pledge allegiance to the flag. I've had mailers sent out with pictured bombs detonating under my face, threats. I always sign the pledge at the Maine Ethics Commission to run a clean campaign. And in a preemptive fashion this year, and JW will verify this, I went and visited the newspaper editors early on in my campaign, and I said, you know, If the crap starts against my opponent, I will immediately act to denounce it. And if the crap starts against me, I'm coming to the papers and asking them to expose it. There's no place for it in our politics. I'm an independent, so I don't have these mailers going out by the political parties that are out of everyone's control here. All you can do as you announce your candidacy is send a message out loud and clear that you're not interested in that kind of campaigning. Everyone's seen the mailers that I've sent out. They're always positive information, a little bit about me, my background. And the most controversial thing that I talk about on my mailers is that I made a political promise that the Red Sox and the Patriots were going to win the championships. And that's as controversial as I get on my flyers. And if you live in Waldoboro, Friendship, or Washington, or Union, you've seen them. And but Abden has my pledge that if independent expenditures come out and attack you, I'm going right to the papers to denounce them. I don't go for the negative stuff. I've already had some stuff happen that have me concerned already, and I just think that people are sick of it. The country is sick of it. The last presidential election was a disgrace, and I've never done it. I've never in my entire life sent out a negative mailer, and I don't have any control of what the independent expenditures do, but I do have control over what happens if they do it. And I guarantee you I will speak out against it in the strongest terms.
Representative Simmons?
I never have and I will never will, for one. The Republican Party, last time I ran, sent out negative ads about my opponent. I made sure I made a phone call that it stopped. It was nothing to do with me. I just found out about it. I went and took care of the problem. This year I've had 2 negative things on Facebook about me, and you know, in all honesty, I kind of had to laugh because the people that knew me, I've lived in this town for 47 years. People that knew me, that I've done the service that I've done in this town for the Shellfish Committee, being on the planning board, being on the select board, know who I am. And it frustrates me to sit there and think that these people know me, that were putting these negative ads out there. And I completely disallow any of this stuff if it's possible. You know, like Jeff said, the political parties, they do it, you don't know anything about it, and it's frustrating to a candidate that happens.
Thank you. And now, with about 15 minutes left, we're going to go into closing statements. We'll start with Representative Bradstreet.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have served in Augusta for 2 years now. You know, I understand Steve's concern about the tenor there. All I can say is that I know it's not Abden, it's not me. When I was a young man, a year out of college, I lived in SAD 49. We had a horrible time there. There's controversy. We're on the front pages every day. At 22 years old, the people of Albion elected me unanimously to serve on the school board. I was on it 1 year, and the second year they chose me to be the chairman at 23 years old because I had an even temperament. I was fair-minded, and I think it rubbed off on the entire situation. It was completely different a year down the road. I take a look at all issues. I believe impartially. I have my beliefs. I have my convictions and my principles. I stick with them. I think if people are, if there's a bill that I don't agree with, I will oppose it. But I will do it fairly and with substantive arguments. I have a strong affinity for the Constitution. I've stood up for it several times in Augusta. When I think it's being threatened, I'll be there to defend it. I take a long view of things. I look at what the impact is going to be down the road, not just what's happening immediately. There's a tendency to try to run and plug holes every time we turn around. That's not a wise thing to do. I have been endorsed by a number of entities, SAM, the NRA, the Maine Credit Union League, Maine Association of Realtors, Christian Civic League of Maine, and also I'm a small business guardian in front of the NFIB. I think that reflects on who I am. I think it shows that I can reach a broad band of people, and I guess my time is up, so thank you.
Chloe?
I get so fired up with my statements, I gotta stand up. I think we all know that politics as usual is failing us. Our local issues are now state and national issues because our government has so profoundly abandoned its people. But every year we keep electing the same kind of folks. They tell us the same thing, they act the same way. We elect them, they get into the state house and they break the same promises, and we're left with the same disillusionment that we had before. Because of that, we end up just digging deeper into our party lines because that's the only thing that we have left to hold on to anymore. We divide our families and our communities, and that's the state of politics right now. But in this moment, we need to be united. It is only together that we can build something better and something different. Because it doesn't matter what party you belong to if you can't afford to age in your home. It doesn't matter what party you belong to if your car breaks down and you can't get to work. It doesn't matter what party you belong to if you can't afford to go to college. This campaign is about lifting up and respecting the voices of everybody in District of 88, no matter who you are, where you come from, how much money you make, where you went to school, where you live. This is about everybody. There's this movie called My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and there's this character, she's a woman, she's Greek Orthodox, and she marries a man outside of her religion, and her father has a very hard time with this, but he finally comes around, and he says, we're apples and oranges, but in the end, we're all fruit. And I think there's a really good lesson there because we may be Republicans and Democrats and independents, but in the end, we're all members of this community. And there is something higher than party, and there's something higher than politics, and that's our humanity. And that's what I want to fight for. I want to fight for everybody in District 88. My cards are back there with my phone number and my email on them. I would love for you to reach out so we can continue the conversation. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Michael?
Thank you. What I'd like everybody to do, when I knock on doors, all I ask people to do is vote fairly. Look at the candidates and look at their experience level. Look at what they can do for you. Look at their knowledge and wisdom of what the Maine people want, the district wants, and vote for the person and not the party. I personally have a lot of experience. Like I said, I've been fighting for my son for 20 years. People don't understand what that really means, but having a child with multiple disabilities, having him be deaf, I'm not just fighting for my son when I go out and fight. I am fighting for absolutely everyone, because there are so many people that are abused in the state of Maine, that are neglected with education and simple little things. You'd be amazed at what I've had to fight for. But I have gone to that state house many a times, and I win. I win fighting against Democrats and Republicans. But what I do is I explain the situation, I come up with an alternative plan, and we make it work. I've also fought on the federal level. Not that that has anything to do with state of Maine, but I've had to fight the federal government, and I win. I win because I research things, and that's what I'm going to do in the State House. Is it's not a matter of just going for a bill because the Republican Party is going for it. I will research the effects of that bill in detail and vote for it only if it works for Maine and my district. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thank you, JW. I'm going to divide my 2 minutes into two parts. 2 months ago, the Portland Press-Herald ran a poll asking the voters what were the most important issues facing them, and 38% said health care, and 35% said the economy and livable wages. But we didn't talk about health care here tonight, so I'm going to take a second to do that. In November of last year, we passed the Medicaid expansion bill through referendum. 59% of the people voted for it. It's the law of the land. The way it's going to work is that the state would provide $55 million in upfront funding, and that would leverage $550 million of federal funds as a match. I have the pamphlet here from the Maine Hospital Association, which they say their members strongly support the expansion because the hospitals are going into debt again. We fixed their past problem with 10-year liquor revenue stream, but now going forward, the people without health insurance are showing up at the hospital, they're providing the care for nothing, and they're going into debt again. So we absolutely have to enact the will of the people. The governor has obstructed it. You're aware probably that he lost his court case and was directed to enact it. But he sent the information down to the federal government, but he put a caveat in there that he was still opposed to it and wasn't going to provide the funding. Let's be clear about something. We ended the year with a $150 million surplus. It went into a rainy day fund. Well, when I grew up, a rainy day fund was for emergencies. And if 70,000 people don't have health care, that is an emergency. In closing, I'm going to continue my independent stance in Augusta. I'm proud that I didn't caucus with either party. I kept my independent status and kept my word to the voters. I'm going to continue to do the good work. I was endorsed by the Maine Conservation Voters, the Maine Education Association, Maine State Employees, AFL-CIO, Equality Maine, and I did receive a A+ rating from the Sportsman Alliance. Abden got the endorsement because he's the incumbent, but we both scored A+ in terms of our support for sportsmen. So thank you very much for your participation tonight.
Representative Simmons.
I don't know if, I'm sure everybody knows by now, but my biggest thing is the commercial fishing industry for this area in Friendship, for Waldoboro and Friendship. Like I said, we have over 650 licensed fishermen in this area. Without those fishermen working, a lot of these programs that we have that we want to pay for will not exist. Those tax dollars will not exist. And it's very frustrating for me to have to go up there. I should step back a little bit. In 2008, I started going to the public hearings in Marine Resources and voicing my opinion. There was nothing being heard. It was people making decisions for my livelihood that had never done this stuff before in their lives. And it was very frustrating. So after 8 years of being up there, I had to run. I just couldn't take it anymore. To make changes on the other side of that table is huge. We had huge success this last year in that committee. I rely a lot on like whatever committees Brad is on, Dick is on, and for their guidance on a lot of things. You cannot be to every single hearing that they have up there. We had 1,927 bills actually printed up there. You cannot go to every single one of those public hearings. It's absolutely impossible. But this last session, we was allowed to get 11 new Elver fishermen in the industry. It doesn't sound like a lot of people, but it's a license of a lifetime. There's only 425 people in the whole state that have this license. We was losing fishermen. The scallop industry, same thing. We opened up a lottery for scallop fishermen. We need these jobs along this coast because it affects our communities along the coast greatly.
All right, we started with Ms. Sabal and we'll end back with you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for a great evening. Thank you for wonderful questions. I would tell you that I come to this not as a seasoned politician at all. I retired a colonel in the Army. I worked at all levels of command. I understand organizations. I love this state. I'm deeply committed to working for the betterment of every Mainer in this district and also in the state of Maine. I've got 2 sons that are veterans, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. I'm very interested in veterans issues. We talk about it. We give a lot of lip service to being patriotic, but I would argue that veterans have been woefully left behind. And so I'm committed to try to do something to help with homeless veterans, with veterans that have come back and are dealing with issues that many of us can't even imagine. We've had some young men and women in the state of Maine that have spent 6, 7, 8 tours in a combat zone. You can't imagine what that does. And so from my perspective, that sort of thing needs to be addressed. Aside from that, I'm very interested in healthcare, and I'm surprised that we didn't get more of a chance to talk about that. I consider healthcare to be the #1 issue that's going to impact our economy. If we don't get healthcare right, we can talk about all the other things that we want to talk about. We're not going to address the fundamental issue to improving this economy. Everybody needs healthcare. Everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again to the candidates. I hear a lot of agreement on certain things tonight, and if not agreement, at least willingness to work together. I feel like here in this room, I feel like you all can make a great deal of progress on the issues that we're talking about. I want to thank the audience for being here and for a lot of great questions. Thank the town again for providing this space, and please help yourself to donuts and cider.
Those donuts.
Yes. Thank you.